I never thought silence could become a habit, but over the years it did. It became something I wore, like a shawl around my shoulders, light enough that others did not notice it, heavy enough that I always felt its weight. The first time my daughter-in-law laughed at me, I smiled back, not because I found it funny, but because I did not know what else to do. We were sitting at the dining table. It was late afternoon, the kind of time when the light is neither bright nor dark. Just tired, she was talking about money. She often did, about returns, about people who knew how to grow wealth, about how important it was to think big. Then she turned to me and asked, "Mom, did you ever invest in anything?" Her voice was casual, almost kind. I told her the truth. "Yes," I said, "just one thing, a small one." She laughed. It was not loud, it was not cruel, but it was enough. I remember how my son froze for a moment. I remember how I looked down at my plate. And I remember how something inside me quietly folded itself away. From that day on, my small investment was no longer just a choice I had made. It became a story others told, a soft joke, a passing comment. And I let it happen because I had lived long enough to know something painful. Explaining yourself does not always bring understanding. Sometimes it only brings more noise. I was not always this quiet. Once, a long time ago, I had a voice that filled rooms, a laugh that came easily, dreams that felt close enough to touch. But life has a way of teaching you when to speak and when to stay still. My husband died young. He left me with a small house, a little money, and a child who depended on me for everything. I learned early that strength does not always look like courage. Sometimes it looks like endurance. I worked wherever I could. I cleaned homes that were bigger than mine. I cooked food I could not afford to eat myself. I smiled at people who did not know my name. Every month, I saved a little, not much, just enough to remind myself that the future was still possible. I did not understand markets or big investments. I understood fear, and I understood responsibility. So when I made that small investment, I did it quietly. No celebration, no announcement. It was not about becoming rich. It was about not becoming helpless. Years passed. My son grew up. He studied. He worked hard, and eventually he met her. She was confident, educated, certain of her place in the world. I admired her at first. I truly did. When they married and came to live with me, I made space without complaint. I moved my things. I adjusted my routines. I told myself this was what mothers did. At first, she was polite. Then she became comfortable. And comfort slowly turned into judgment. She liked efficiency, modern thinking, clear results. I liked patience, waiting, trusting time. She did not say I was wrong. She did not need to. Her silence did that for her. At family gatherings, she would talk about smart investments, about people who multiplied money. Then she would glance at me, smiling slightly, and say, "Mom believes in simple things." Everyone would nod. I would smile. Inside, I would remember nights when I counted coins under dim light. I would remember choosing between fixing a leak or buying books for my son. I would remember believing that slow growth was still growth. But I never said any of that, because pain explained too often loses its meaning. One evening, after dinner, she laughed again. "You know," she said, "some people stay small because they think small." The words were light, but they landed heavily. My son did not defend me. He did not agree either. He simply stayed quiet. I understood his silence. He was torn between two worlds, and I did not want to pull him apart, so I did what I had learned to do best. I smiled. I washed the dishes slowly that night, letting the water run longer than necessary, letting the sound fill the room. I told myself it did not matter, that I did not need approval, that my choices had already served their purpose. Still, something inside me grew tired, not angry, just tired. Years continued to pass. The investment grew quietly. I checked it once a year, never told anyone the details, never spoke of numbers. To me, it was not a victory. It was a reminder of survival, but to her, it was still a joke. Sometimes she would say, "Mom, you should have trusted experts." I would nod. Sometimes she would say, "That little money could have done more." I would smile. She did not see the nights I lay awake worrying about becoming a burden. She did not see the fear of old age without dignity, and I did not make her see it, because some truths feel too fragile to place in careless hands. Then came the day her father visited. I did not know then that it would change everything. I only knew the house felt heavier that morning. She seemed eager to impress him, talking about achievements, plans, future goals, and once again she laughed. "Dad," she said, "did you know Mom invested all her savings in something tiny? She thought it was enough." I felt the old familiar tightening in my chest, the instinct to disappear, but her father did not laugh. He looked at me for a long moment, longer than anyone ever had, and in that silence something began to shift. He asked her quietly, "Do you know why she did that?" She shrugged. And for the first time in years I did not smile. I simply sat there, waiting. I had spent most of my life learning how to be useful without being visible. It was not something I decided one day. It happened slowly. Like dust settling on furniture you no longer move. After that afternoon when her father asked why I made that investment, nothing was said right away. The question stayed in the air, unfinished, like a sentence no one was ready to hear the end of. Dinner continued, plates were passed, water was poured, conversation shifted to other things, but something had changed. I felt it in the way my daughter-in-law avoided my eyes. I felt it in the way my son kept looking at his plate as if answers might appear there. That night, I did not sleep well, not because I was worried, but because old memories came back, one by one, without asking permission. I remembered the first year after my husband died, how quiet the house felt, how every sound seemed too loud and too empty at the same time. I remembered standing in a bank many years ago, holding papers in my hand, afraid of making a mistake. The man behind the desk had spoken quickly, used words I did not fully understand. I had nodded anyway, not because I understood, but because I trusted myself enough to know what I wanted. I wanted safety, nothing more. That investment was never meant to be impressive. It was meant to be steady, but over the years, the way my daughter-in-law spoke about it made me question myself. Not my decision, but my worth. It is a strange thing. You can be strong for decades, and still one careless laugh can make you feel small again. In the mornings, I would wake early, before everyone else. I liked those quiet hours. I would sit near the window with a cup of tea, watching the street wake up. People rushing, lives moving forward. I wondered sometimes if anyone noticed how much space I no longer took up. I cooked meals, I cleaned, I listened, but I was no longer asked. Decisions were made without me, plans discussed as if I was already fading into the background. Sometimes my daughter-in-law would talk about the future, about where they might move, about bigger houses, better neighborhoods. She never asked if I would come with them, and I never asked either. I told myself this was normal, that parents are meant to step back, but stepping back slowly turned into stepping aside. One evening, my son came home late. He looked tired, older than his years. He sat down and rubbed his face. "Ammy," he said quietly, "you should rest more." I nodded. He hesitated, then added, "You've done enough." The words were meant to be kind, but they felt like a door closing gently. I wanted to tell him I was not tired of living, that I still had thoughts, hopes, fears, but I stayed silent, because I did not want to sound like a burden asking to be carried. Days turned into months. My daughter-in-law continued to succeed. Promotions, praise, confidence. I watched her grow taller in her own eyes, and me smaller. Sometimes she would give advice without being asked, about money, about health, about how things should be done nowadays. I listened politely. Inside, I felt something thinning, not breaking, just wearing down. There is a kind of sadness that does not cry. It simply waits. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I overheard her on the phone. She was laughing. "Yes," she said, "Mom is very simple. She doesn't understand these things." I froze. Not because of the words, but because she said them so easily, as if I were not a person, just a background detail. That night I ate alone. I was not excluded on purpose. They were busy, out with friends. But sitting at the table by myself, I realized something. Loneliness does not always come from being alone. Sometimes it comes from being surrounded by people who no longer see you. I thought about leaving then. Just quietly moving somewhere smaller, somewhere I would not feel in the way, but I stayed because the house still held memories, because leaving felt like admitting defeat, and because part of me still believed things could change. The investment continued to grow. I checked it once, late at night, when no one was around. The numbers were more than enough now, enough to live comfortably, enough to leave quietly. But money does not erase sadness. It only makes it easier to carry. I did not tell anyone. Some secrets are not meant to be shared. They are meant to protect you. Then came another family dinner, another small gathering. Her father was there again. This time, the atmosphere was different. He watched more, spoke less. At one point, my daughter-in-law laughed again, not as loudly, but still sharp enough. "She's lucky," she said. Even her small choices worked out. I felt tired. Not angry, just tired. Her father put down his spoon. He looked at her, then at my son. And then he spoke, not loudly, not harshly, but with a calm that demanded attention. "You talk about her choices," he said. "But do you understand her sacrifices?" The room grew quiet. No one answered. He continued, "She invested when she had almost nothing. That is not small, that is brave." My heart beat faster. I wanted him to stop. Not because he was wrong, but because I was not ready to be seen. He turned to me. "Did you ever regret it?" he asked gently. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly. "No," I said softly. "I only regret being laughed at for it." The words surprised even me. I had never said them out loud before. Silence filled the room. My daughter-in-law's face changed, not with anger, but with something else. Confusion, maybe shame. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. That night, after everyone slept, I sat alone in my room. I did not feel relieved. I did not feel victorious. I felt exposed. Being understood after years of being unseen is not always comforting. Sometimes it feels like standing in cold air without a coat. I wondered if things would truly change, or if this was just a pause before returning to how things were. I wondered if respect, once delayed, arrives too late to feel real. I lay down and stared at the ceiling. I thought about all the years I had stayed quiet, about how easily people mistake silence for emptiness, and for the first time I allowed myself to feel something deeply. Not anger, grief for the parts of me that had waited so long to be acknowledged, grief for the woman I used to be, the one who laughed without thinking, who spoke without fear of being dismissed. That night, sleep came slowly, and with it the quiet understanding that even when truth is spoken, not every wound heals the same way. Some scars remain, not to hurt us, but to remind us of what we endured. After that evening, the house did not return to how it was before, but it did not become warmer either. It became careful. My daughter-in-law spoke to me more gently. Her words were softer, her tone measured. She asked me questions now, small ones about my health, about my day. I answered politely, but something between us had already settled into place. Not anger, not bitterness, distance. It is strange how quickly people can change their behavior, and how slowly the heart accepts it. I could feel her trying. I truly could. But effort does not erase years of quiet dismissal. It only reminds you how long it lasted. My son also changed. He sat with me more often, asked if I needed anything. Sometimes he would stand in the doorway of my room, unsure whether to enter, as if he had suddenly remembered that I was not furniture, that I was a person. I smiled at him. I did not want him to feel guilty. Guilt is heavy, and I had carried enough weight in my life already. Days passed like that, careful conversations, polite concern. I told myself this was improvement, that I should be grateful, but inside something had shifted. When you are ignored for too long, being noticed suddenly feels unfamiliar, almost intrusive. I found myself pulling inward, speaking less, sharing even less, not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I no longer knew how to open myself again. There is a moment in every long silence when the silence becomes part of who you are. One afternoon, my daughter-in-law sat beside me on the couch. "I didn't understand you before," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." Her words were honest. I could tell. I nodded. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she added. I looked at her face. She looked tired. Human, I know, I said, and I meant it, but knowing does not undo feeling. She waited for me to say more, to explain, to open old wounds. I didn't. Some pain does not need to be described to be real, and some apologies come after the heart has already learned to live without comfort. She reached for my hand. I let her hold it. Her hand was warm. Mine felt cold. After she left the room, I sat there for a long time, thinking. I realized then that forgiveness is not always loud or emotional. Sometimes it is quiet acceptance, not because everything is healed, but because you no longer have the strength to keep wounds open. That night, I made a decision, not suddenly, not dramatically. It felt like something I had been slowly preparing for without knowing. I opened the small drawer near my bed, the one where I kept important papers. I took out the documents related to my investment. I looked at the numbers calmly. They were enough to live on my own. Enough to not ask, enough to not explain. I folded the papers carefully and put them back. I did not tell anyone. I needed time to understand my own heart. In the following weeks, I started noticing things more clearly. Noticing how often I held my breath when speaking, how often I waited for permission that was never asked of me. I noticed how my daughter-in-law still spoke over me sometimes, not intentionally, just out of habit. I noticed how my son still avoided difficult conversations, how he preferred peace over honesty. I did not blame them. People are shaped by what they fear losing, and I realized something else too. I had been afraid of losing them for so long that I had slowly lost myself instead. One evening, I stood in the kitchen alone. The house was quiet. I looked around. Every corner held memory. My son learning to walk, my husband's laughter, long nights of worry and prayer. I pressed my hand against the counter. This house had been my whole world, and now it felt smaller, not because it had changed, but because I had. A few days later, my daughter-in-law mentioned moving again, a better opportunity, a bigger place. She spoke carefully, watching my face. We were thinking. She said maybe we should plan something soon. I nodded. That's good. I said. She hesitated. And, of course, you'll be with us. The words felt heavy. Not because I didn't love my family, but because I no longer wanted to feel like an addition to someone else's life. I smiled gently. We'll see, I said. She looked surprised. Later that night, my son came to my room. Amy, he said, you're coming with us, right? I looked at him, really looked. He was no longer the boy I raised. He was a man with his own fears, his own compromises. I don't know, I said honestly. He looked hurt. I don't want to be a burden, I added softly. You're not? He said quickly. I nodded. I know, I replied, but sometimes feeling like one is enough. He sat silently. Neither of us knew what to say next. In the days that followed, I felt a strange calm, as if something inside me had settled. I began sorting my belongings, giving away things I no longer needed. I told myself it was just cleaning, just organizing. But deep down I knew preparation is often quiet. One morning I woke up feeling very tired, not sick, just tired. I sat by the window with my tea, watching the street. I thought about the years ahead, about how I wanted to live them. I did not want applause or recognition. I wanted peace, and for the first time, I admitted something to myself. Love that comes late still matters, but it cannot replace the years when you needed it most. Some gaps cannot be filled, they can only be acknowledged. That realization did not make me angry, it made me sad, a soft sadness, the kind that settles into your bones. I knew then that whatever came next would not be dramatic. No arguments, no accusations, just a slow, quiet step away. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the investment again. How small it had seemed to others, how large it had been in my life. It had protected me when no one else could. It had given me choices, and now it was giving me one last gift, the chance to leave without bitterness, the chance to choose myself. Sleep came gently that night, and in my dreams I was younger, walking alone. Not afraid. I did not tell anyone right away, not because I was hiding something, but because I needed the decision to belong to me first. For many years, my choices had been shaped by others, by responsibility. By fear of hurting someone, by fear of being alone. This one needed to be quiet, steady, certain. I began waking even earlier than before. The mornings felt heavier now, but also clearer, like air after rain. I packed slowly, not in boxes, in thoughts. Each item I touched carried a memory. A faded shawl from my husband's last winter. Old notebooks from my son's school days. Small things that once felt important. I did not rush. There was no need. Sometimes my daughter-in-law would notice me sorting things. "Why are you giving this away?" she asked once, holding an old dish. "I don't need it anymore," I said. She smiled, unsure, as if she sensed something but did not know what name to give it. My son noticed too. He asked gently if I was planning something. "I'm just clearing space," I said. That was not a lie. I was clearing space inside myself. At night, I would lie awake listening to the house. The sounds were familiar, comforting, and yet they no longer felt like they belonged to me. I realized then that belonging is not always about love. Sometimes it is about presence, and my presence had slowly faded. One evening, I sat at the dining table while they talked about their future home. The rooms, the light, the neighborhood, they spoke with excitement. Hope, I listened quietly. No one asked what I thought, and for the first time it did not hurt. I felt calm. I had already stepped away in my heart. A few days later, I visited a small place on the other side of town. It was nothing special, just 2 rooms, a small kitchen, a window that let in afternoon light. It felt peaceful. The woman showing it to me spoke quickly. I barely listened. I stood by the window and closed my eyes. I imagined mornings there, quiet, uninterrupted. I imagined evenings without having to make myself smaller. "I'll take it," I said. My voice did not shake. When I returned home that day, the house felt different. Not colder, just distant. I sat on my bed and looked around. This room had held my whole life, my grief, my strength, my silence. I placed my hand on the wall. "Thank you," I whispered. I did not cry. Crying feels like a release. This felt like acceptance. Telling them was harder than deciding. I chose a simple moment, after dinner, when no one was rushed. "I've found a place," I said quietly. They both looked at me. "A place?" my son asked. "For myself," I replied. The room went still. My daughter-in-law spoke first. "But why?" I thought for a moment. "I want to live quietly," I said. "I don't want to feel in the way." "You're not in the way," my son said quickly. I nodded. "I know," I said, "but feelings don't always listen to words." My daughter-in-law's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't mean to make you feel that way," she said. I looked at her, really looked. "I believe you," I said, "but time has already done its work. They tried to convince me to stay. Promises were made, changes offered. I listened, I thanked them, but my decision did not change. Sometimes staying hurts more than leaving. And sometimes leaving is the only way to remain kind. The night before I moved, I slept very little, not from fear, but from memory. I walked through the house slowly, touching door frames, pausing in familiar spaces. I stood in the kitchen where I had spent so many quiet hours, cooking, cleaning, listening to laughter that was no longer mine. I sat at the table and remembered my husband's voice, my son's childhood questions. "My younger self," I whispered goodbye to each room. In the morning, I packed the last bag. My daughter-in-law hugged me tightly. Her body shook slightly. "I wish I had known sooner," she whispered. I held her. "So do I," I replied softly. My son walked me to the door. He looked like he wanted to say something important, something that could stop me, but he didn't. Sometimes love understands when words cannot. As I stepped outside, I felt the weight lift. Not happiness, not relief, just lightness. The new place was quiet, almost too quiet at first. The first night, I sat on the floor and ate a simple meal. I listened to the silence. It felt unfamiliar, but it did not feel empty. Days passed. I settled into a routine. Tea in the morning, walks in the afternoon, books I had forgotten I loved. Sometimes my phone rang. Sometimes it didn't. They visited, not often, but enough. We spoke kindly, carefully. I could feel regret in their voices. Love too, but regret does not travel backward. It only sits beside you. One evening, alone in my small room, I opened the investment papers again. I thought about how that small decision had carried me here, how it had protected me when I needed it most. I smiled sadly. Not all protection saves you from pain. Some of it only saves you from collapse. As weeks turned into months, my body grew weaker, not suddenly, just quietly. Doctors spoke gently. I listened calmly. I was not afraid. I had already lived through the hardest part, being unseen. Now I was simply tired. One afternoon, my daughter-in-law sat beside my bed. She held my hand. "I think about it all the time," she said. "The way I spoke to you." I looked at her. "Don't," I said softly. "Live better instead." Tears fell from her eyes. I wiped one away. Life does not ask for perfect endings, only honest ones. That night, alone again, I stared at the ceiling. I did not feel lonely. I felt complete, and I knew quietly that whatever time I had left would be gentle. The days began to move more slowly after that, not because time had changed, but because I had. I noticed it in small ways. How long it took me to rise from the chair, how my breath paused between sentences, how silence felt heavier than before, but not unkind. I lived gently then, as if the world had grown fragile and I did not want to disturb it. Each morning, I made my tea the same way. I sat by the window and watched people pass. I did not wonder where they were going anymore. I had already arrived. My son called often, sometimes just to ask if I had eaten, sometimes with no reason at all. His voice carried something new, care and regret, not the loud kind, the quiet kind that settles late. My daughter-in-law visited more frequently too. She brought food, warm shawls, small comforts. She spoke less now, listened more. One afternoon, she sat beside me and said, "I used to think strength was loud." I smiled faintly. "And now?" I asked. "Now I know it's quiet," she replied. I nodded. Some lessons come only after loss has already begun. I did not tell them how tired I felt, not because I wanted to hide it, but because there was no need to worry them with something they could not change. I had lived my life without asking for much. I did not want to end it by asking for fear. At night, memories came easily, not painful ones, just complete ones. I remembered my husband's laughter, the way he used to hum when he thought no one was listening, the warmth of his hand in mine. I remembered my son as a child, how he used to fall asleep on my shoulder, how safe he felt there. I remembered myself, younger, hopeful, afraid, but still moving forward. I did not feel sad remembering these things. I felt grateful. There is a kind of peace that comes when you stop asking life for more. One evening, my son stayed late. He sat across from me, hands folded, eyes searching. "Amy," he said softly, "was I a good son?" The question broke something open in me. I reached for his hand. "You were the reason I survived." I said, "You were enough." His eyes filled with tears. "I should have protected you more," he whispered. I shook my head slowly. "You protected me by living your life." I replied, "That was always enough." He cried quietly, the way children do when they don't want to be seen. I held his hand until his breathing slowed. Later, when he left, the room felt very still. I realized then that this might be one of our last conversations like that, not because death was near, but because truth had already been spoken. There were no more things left unsaid. Days passed, my body weakened, but my mind stayed clear. I spent time sorting thoughts instead of belongings. I thought about the investment again, that small choice that had been laughed at for years. It had never been about money. It had been about dignity. It had given me the ability to leave without begging, to live without resentment, to die without regret. Not everyone gets that. One morning, I felt especially tired, the kind of tired that rests deep in the bones. I stayed in bed longer, watched the light move across the wall. My daughter-in-law came quietly and sat beside me. "Are you in pain?" she asked. "No," I said honestly. "Just resting." She held my hand. "I wish I could go back," she said. "I would do things differently." I squeezed her fingers gently. "Don't look back," I whispered. "Look at how you speak to others now. That matters more." Tears fell onto the blanket. I did not wipe them away. Grief needs permission. That night, I dreamed of a long road. I was walking alone, but I was not afraid. There was no destination, just movement. When I woke up, I felt calm. I knew then that I was ready, Not eager, not scared, just ready. The next few days came and went quietly. I slept often, spoke little. My son and daughter-in-law stayed close. One afternoon, I asked my son to bring the investment papers. He hesitated just to look at them. I said. He brought them and placed them in my hands. I touched the pages gently. So much noise over something so small. I murmured. He smiled sadly. I understand now, he said. That's enough, I replied. I asked him to use what remained for kindness, not ambition, not pride. He nodded. I did not give long instructions. I trusted him. Trust was the one thing I never lost. That night, the air felt different. Quieter, almost respectful. I lay in bed, listening to my own breath. I thought about how often I had stayed silent to keep peace, how often I had chosen patience over pride. Some might say I gave too much, but I knew the truth. I had given what I could when I could in the only way I knew how. That was enough. In the early hours of the morning, I woke briefly. The room was dim. Still, I felt no pain, only a deep tiredness. I thought of one last thing, that sometimes people laugh not because something is small, but because they do not yet understand its weight. And sometimes understanding comes when it is already too late to say thank you. My last breath was quiet, like my life had been. There was no struggle, no fear, just release. Later, they would sit in that room and feel the absence. They would remember the words they wished they had spoken sooner. They would understand the cost of silence, and maybe in some quiet moment they would speak more gently to someone else. That would be my final investment, not money, not security, but a lesson carried forward.